let's get started. So a few things first. I said I was going to mute everybody, and I did. And you'll stay muted, but there is a short Q&A at the end. And to leave questions for Louise, use the chat function. You may have seen that already. Yeah, use the chat function here. Somebody said Happy New Year right now in the chat, I think, to me. It's a great way to do that. Leave questions. Before I ask Louise questions, I want to remind you that we have 2 more lectures coming up. Lecture 2 is with Tina Chansey, talking about making music for silent films. And lecture 3 features Susan Hallauer with Clifton Boyd, talking about racial stereotypes. A very timely subject, I must say. These lectures are going to be just as wonderful. And so do take a moment to sign up for them. The link is, well, actually go to the website at MB1800.org, where you can also find our online donation form. So let me just hand it over to Louise with our questions. Louise, do you want to say anything before I ask you questions?
Oh, sure. I just wanted to greet everyone. Most of you I've already greeted, and thank Henry. We've been working 13 hours apart since the beginning of September, but hope he and Yen-Yu will come back to 126th Street and 5th Avenue by the end of March. Both of their parents live in Taiwan, and that's where they've been enjoying life, not in a hunkered down existence. And I just wanted to mention or forewarn you that this is a nitty-gritty demonstration or lecture about presenting concerts. Judith Wink said years ago that what was most important, the most important quality for a concert presenter was guts. So maybe you'll get a lot of guts and adventure I hope, in this presentation today. So let's move ahead, Henry, right away.
Right, so happy Valentine's Day. Let's talk a little bit about love and passion for music, which Louise has a lot. Now, Louise has a special passion, though, for early music. And I wonder about that. Louise, how did you start? When did you fall in love with early music?
My much older sister was playing the piano, and so I wanted to do whatever she did. She also went to Wellesley. I did as well. And I started taking piano lessons when I was about 5 years old, and thought that Bach and Purcell were just right for me, less so the romantic composers. By the end of high school, I was taking organ lessons, and when I got to Wellesley College, I started trying to become musically literate, not illiterate, and also had the opportunity there to study with Melville Smith, a wonderful organ teacher. But it wasn't until 64 to 68, when I was at Chapel Hill at the University of North Carolina, that I really began to move forward in my commitment to early music. They had a wonderful library there. It was not particularly well used. It was open to anyone, especially graduate students. And they had complete sets of Denkmiller editions, collected works of composers, editions that were made between the two world wars. And at the same time, I took a lot of courses and worked my way page by page, footnote by footnote, through Gustav Ries's 2 monumental studies, the music in the Renaissance and music in the Middle Ages. And so when I came to New York in 68, I was ready to perform, and there were lots of really excellent teachers, but more important, a huge array of very talented musicians, several of whom are here today. And so that's what got me going.
So you got to New York, and this is a picture of Corpus Christi Church. You were performing and learning a lot about other performers and the repertoire. But what what got in your mind about presenting concerts instead? How come you went from just being a performer to a presenter?
Well, I got this job at Corpus Christi in 1975, and it was a wonderful situation, a great tradition of liturgical music, especially early music, a wonderful Holtkamp organ that was built in the late 50s, and a good priest and mentor and boss, Monsignor Miles Burke. I had a busy mass schedule, but I had a window of time Sunday afternoons before I had to play the 6 o'clock mass. And so I asked Monsignor if I could have concerts there, and he said that was fine. I wondered whether I should do contemporary or early music concerts. And it was a fairly easy decision. There are lots of good spaces for contemporary music. Corpus Christi is not one of them, but Corpus Christi, although not absolutely perfect, is very a wonderful space. It's elegant visually and acoustically, and it works well for the nuanced instruments and the elegant phrasing of early music singers. So we started out with a collective of 18 concerts. There's the flyer on the left. And as a woman in the neighborhood was a calligrapher, and so she actually was Jewish. She made this Corpus Christi concert with a cross on it, and we had 18 concerts, minimal suggested contribution, $2.50, and we kept the expenses very low. We took care of the expenses and gave the rest, a few dollars, maybe a few more than that, to the individual performers. The very last concert that season was by the choir of Corpus Christi Church. And although the church funded that, Monsignor said if I wanted to keep going on this, it's welcome to use the church, but I had to raise the money to support the performers and the events. And so I set my sights on the New York State Council of the Arts, which had really deep pockets for organizations like ours at the time. We had to get 501c3, we had to incorporate, we had to get a board, we had to get contracts. So we immediately had to get going as far as our business acumen was concerned. Incidentally, the person who created our bylaws and did our 501c3 was Miriam Friedman, who is Richard Taruskin's sister, for those of you who recognize his name. Corpus Christi, well, you can see we had two series, the spring and the fall series, and that lasted exuberantly for a few years, and we settled down to maybe 8 or 10 concerts. Last year we had scheduled 8 concerts at Corpus Christi and 3 off-site at the Acoustical Foundation. So we've pretty much settled into that 8 to 10 or 11 concert routine.
So I noticed that the name Music Before 1800 has been used from basically since the beginning, since the very first flyer here. And I wondered about this because 1800, I don't remember any major composers born or died that year. What's in the name? How did you settle on the name Music Before 1800?
Exactly how, I don't remember. So that's buried in the archives somewhere back in 1975. But I wanted a straightforward name, and probably was thinking of the group for contemporary music that Charles Warren and Harvey Solberger had next door at Columbia University. I leave it to the performing groups to come up with foreign titles and present themselves in that exotic way. But I think for a concert series, other than calling it the Early Music Series of Morningside Heights, which was a little bit too prosaic, I thought Music Before 1800 was concise and interesting. You know, examples of the exotic choices would be Alex Blatchley's Pomerium or Malapunica or Stile Antico, Sequentia. They're memorable, but a name like that doesn't immediately associate the subscriber or the audience member to a concert series that's going to represent medieval, Renaissance, Baroque, and early classical concert series. It has to be more broad and more diverse than that. And we had a commitment to all the historical eras, fulfilling those slots as much as we could. We wanted new and established groups, local, American, international, and soloists and large ensembles. One of the early members of the board was Jane O'Wyatt, who offered her services and volunteered as a designer. She subsequently left the board, and we started paying her for all of our print designs. And you see 4 recent examples here. I expect most all of you will recognize one or more of them.
So every time when we get a review on the New York Times, I get pretty excited. But I learned later on that reviews were more common back then. But I wonder, when did we start getting these reviews? When did we start getting some national or international attention?
Pretty much at the outset. My own group, Music Before 1800 Productions, did oratorios by Scarlatti, Stradella, Carissimi, and this piqued the interest, especially of Andrew Porter at the New Yorker and Alan Kozin at the New York Times. And thinking back and looking at the files of reviews, back in the day, there you could get listings on a daily basis, and certainly the weekend in print like New Yorker, Daily News, Village Voice, and of course the New York Times. And this is a feature that Alan Kozin wrote for our 25th anniversary. He reviewed a lot of concerts, but you name any critic that was in the New York area, and it's likely that he or she came to Music Before 1800. Many reviewed Music Before 1800 Productions, but there were wonderful reviews and pictures of many, many groups. I think there's another feature article here. This was also the 25th anniversary. Craig Zeichner has been a writer about early music for years, is still a good friend and colleague. And this was an article he wrote for Early Music America. And you see the church facade here. It's a nice picture of the outside of Corpus Christi, which, as you all know, really blends into the block. It's dwarfed by Union Seminary and Riverside Church, but unexpected when you get inside. It's so very beautiful. And there were wonderful groups, many of whom you'll recognize. Les Filles, there's the one trio of gamba players, Wendy Gillespie, Mary Stringfells, and Sarah Cunningham. But we presented a lot of any number of viol consorts through the years. Members usually are 4, 5, and 6. Phantasm, Fretwork, New York Consort of Viols, Parthenia. And for many years, just go back a sec to Henry to let me talk about the Hilliards, a quartet of wonderful Englishmen, wonderful singers who did a huge variety of repertoire. And what I remember most poignantly was an encore of one of their programs where they sang rather barbershop fashion, Arthur Sullivan's A Long Day Closes. It was wonderful. And they performed for many, many years. Now we can go ahead, Henry, thank you. Swan Alley, I wanted to put up, this would be the first appearance of a very youthful Paul Odette. He had just joined the group, which was led by Lyle and Pat Nordstrom. Pomerium, still thriving today, but probably a little grayer, a little less bushy hair than this picture. Alex Blatchley is at the very top. He presented numerous performances with an incredible variety of beautifully worked and crafted programs, a huge tour de force of late medieval and Renaissance polyphony. And of course, Anonymous 4, and aren't we lucky to have Susan as a board member? We don't have performers on the board, or active performers. She certainly is a performer, but not actively so anymore. And they were probably the greatest stalwarts of music before 1800. For many years, they were rehearsing at Corpus Christi Church. They liked to rehearse in a place that was acoustically congenial, and so I'd be sitting down in the office and I could hear them hour after hour rehearsing the wonderful repertoire that they did. The last concert that they presented was at the Great Hall at Cooper Union, and it was called 1865, a little bit after Music Before 1800. But Abraham Lincoln in 1860 gave a very famous address at the Great Hall at Cooper Union. And so when this concert was proposed, we were exploring many outside venues for our offsite concerts. And I thought that taking Anonymous 4 down to the East Village and having them perform there, this program with Bruce Malsky would be the great way to bid them adieu. And then their final concert in New York that season was, I believe, at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where they performed many, many times. So thank you, Anonymous 4, for many, many concerts. I remember one in particular. It was a Christmas concert. It was completely sold out in advance. And it was about a snowstorm about like last Monday's. And it was still very gray and snowy, and lots of people couldn't get there. And it seemed like an intimate and not terribly festive concert. But of course, the show went on. So also, Anonymous 4 performed the first concert after 9/11. I think their concert was on September 23rd, and that was a challenge as well. But they had so many performances, and you're bound to run into weather, if not 9/11, for at least one of them. But I thank them for their wonderful contribution.
I understand that we have a commitment and dedication to younger and emerging artists. There are many of them, I believe, who have performed on the series who later on became quite famous. Could you remember some of these people who were introduced to New York through MB1800?
Well, I think the first pictures you'll see are Peter Phillips and the Talus scholars, and we presented their New York debut. Margaret Panofsky, our longtime program editor and an assistant who wears many hats most capably, and I've always tried to get a debut concert every year if we could manage it. And the attraction for Corpus Christi Church was that we had a very good, loyal, and attentive audience, and the acoustics were good. So as the groups got more and more famous, they played in bigger and bigger halls, but not necessarily the lovely sound and friendly commitment that they found at Corpus Christi. So we were fortunate in that regard. We also presented Jordi Savall, it's now Hesperian 21, at about the same time as the Talus scholars. And of course, most of these pictures are black and white, and it was back in the day when these black and white photos were just wonderful. Now, so many things have changed. Not that the photographs aren't wonderful, but we don't see many black and white anymore. So the question of debuts, we presented the New York debut of groups like Pifero, these are American groups, Les Délices, Apollo's Fire, and Warren Stewart's wonderful Magnificat did a concert of Castellani, the first all-women Baroque concert that we had, actually a concert by a woman composer, a little tongue-tied here. And then among the European groups, I would mention Arte Chorale, which was only here one time, I believe. The second concert tour had to be canceled. It's a group of men, mostly basses from Russia, and they perform wearing long black robes, and the sonority of those Russian singers was just something that you could never forget. Vox Luminis first performed in 2014, Les Talents Lyriques in 2004, and Margaret and I worked for many years to get the Ensemble Turchini here. They're based in Naples, where there's a fantastic treasure trove of Baroque music in the conservatory library. There are many examples. I hope you recognize most of these names. Others would be less familiar, I think.
So I know you've already mentioned quite a few, but are there a few other highlights you could share with us? I mean, it's been more than 4 decades after all.
Sure. So Peter Perrin was a good friend, and he ran the Alliance for American Song. And through my former husband, George Basbas, who was a postdoc at NYU at the time, we had the nice coincidence of presenting a concert for the sesquicentennial of NYU. And we also presented, if you'll show the review, Henry, a repeat of this concert at Corpus Christi. Edward Rothstein was a critic for several years on the New York Times. The only faux pas about this, you can see at the beginning of the second paragraph, he talked about the unwitting cheer of the title "Go Congregation Go," which is really more of a lament. He got there late and he second guessed incorrectly what the content of the music was, but the rest he pretty much outlined and enjoyed the performances of the wonderful singers and instrumentalists that were involved, not to mention the literature that we did. These people continued to perform. They were called Benefit Street after Benefit Street in Providence, Rhode Island, where Scott Metcalf in the upper left went as an undergraduate. I believe he majored in chemistry, or at least a science. Then he went on to get a master's degree at Harvard. Peter Sykes will be performing in June, a harpsichord recital. He is on the faculty of the Historical Performance Program at Juilliard. And to the right is Robert Mealy, who is, of course, director of the Historical Performance Program. He had just graduated from Harvard, and Emily Walhoot is Scott's wife and a wonderful gambist and cellist. So it's a bit of a time warp, but there they were, and now they've become, in our small world of early music performances, really, really quite distinguished. Scott, I don't believe I mentioned, is the director of Blue Heron, and we hope to have them back live next winter. We'll see. Sequentia has performed many, many times. This is an early picture. Marguerite Tindemans, David Hart, Barbara Thornton, and Ben Bagby. They were based in Cologne, and that's the cathedral in Cologne in the background. I think Ben lives now in Paris, but they perform frequently at Corpus Christi, most recently, I think, January of 2020. And is that right? Or yes, 2020. And shortly before that, Ben performed once again a repeat performance of his tour de force of Beowulf. But a recent memorable concert by them was the concert. Let me look for the date here. Well, I guess we can ignore the date, but it was of April, I want to say 2017. I went up to the church early Sunday morning and found the office and the rectory under 2 inches of water, and the sacristy and the rectory under 2 inches of water. There'd been a pipe burst during the night, which I think Amanda Cooper is here today, and she was our concert manager at the time. Pretty much upset it pretty much destroyed the office. The piano had to be rebuilt, the computers had to be replaced, all of the music had to be freeze dried and returned in that crinkly form to our library. But the show went on, and Sequentia gave a wonderful performance. I also remember For a long time, they didn't present texts. They gave you a synopsis in the program, and that was what they wanted to do, pretty much following the Quartet for Early Music tradition. But then they started projecting the text, and there was one program where there was a fairly naughty text about nuns, which offended a couple of the people who wrote to Raymond Rafferty, who was then the pastor of Corpus Christi. He fobbed the letter off on me, and I responded. You have to be a little bit careful. The church is very elegant. It's a church, and back in the early days, there were some groups that were more world music, folk-like in their appearance, with Indian bedspreads that were adapted to concert attire. They were better suited to the bitter end or what is now LPR in the village than they were to a formal church setting. Also, just parenthetically, the church has many levels and they're all bordered in black. So the one concert we had a dancer, it was a little bit disarming. He managed quite well, a Spanish man, but it doesn't work terribly well for dance or for really informal secular concerts, I would say. And that was one of the motivations in finding other venues. I did want to mention the other venues that we've used in addition to Cooper Union for Anonymous 4. We performed at the Green Space, which is WNYC's auditorium here in the West Village, and many years ago at the Drawing Center. That was another stormy night in either January or February, and Willard Martin was driving and donating one of his wonderful harpsichords. He lives in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. He barely made it in time. Alan Cozen complained because it was like an ice rink getting down from the subway station to the Drawing Center in Soho. But the show went on, and the concert was well reviewed by the New York Times. So this is an example. Margaret started working for Music Before 1800 in 1989. She lives downstairs in the building here where I live in Greenwich Village. So communication and meetings, although not right now, we're both being hunkered down, are convenient. And she created this elegant format, which we've pretty much followed ever since, over the 30 years she's been working with us. This is a recent program by Capella Pratensis in the fall of 2019, and Margaret incorporated the incipit from the print, the Agnus Dei of the Obrecht Missa Maria Zart, and it's all beautifully and accurately presented. Margaret's many skills, in addition to being a gamba player. She has a fine eye for criticism, for text, for writing, and for design. So thank you, Margaret.
Yeah, the flood before Sequencia's concert, I believe that was back in April 2017. And I was there helping out with the box office at the door. I remember clearly because Amanda that day gave me a hair blow dryer with a stack of dollar bills. She told me, if you have nothing to do, dry these dollars. So speaking of storms and whatever, what were some of the most difficult challenges over the years?
Well, I put down visas and other touring logistics, although Shannon Canavan is the go-to person to get visas. In some instances, they've been down to the wire and nerve-wracking. And I look forward to working with her again when people start traveling, and certainly am more comfortable in this administration than I would have been last year in a previous administration. There are examples of groups or performers being sick in the business of performance, you always have at the back of your mind 2 or 3 subs and hope you don't have to use them. But I remember the first time that Vox Luminis performed, they'd been on tour, and I think about half the group was ill, and they're really a shadow of their best. But when they came back several years later in 2018 to perform Bach motets, it was just mind-bogglingly beautiful. So they more than made up for their initial debut in 2014. And then all the storms and floods, most of which I've referred to already. There was a group called Europa Galante who performed on the 28th of October, 2012. And the city's public transportation was being shut down at 7. They were supposed to inaugurate a new hall, I believe at the University of Chicago on Tuesday. So they shortened their program a little bit. They omitted some repeats and some of the Baroque music. And they left immediately and drove to Chicago. And the director of the group said, oh, well, it's just 900 miles away. We can get there in 9 hours. But of course, in Italy, they don't have any speed limits. We assured him it might take a little bit longer than that. But they did, happy ending. They got to Chicago, and they gave a wonderful performance, I'm sure. And I'm sure they lost a lot of money having to make these last minute, very expensive adjustments. So those are some examples.
We're down to the last 2 questions. And I think the pandemic has really forced us to rethink about presenting in general. Where do you see MB1800 heading in the future?
Well, I hope we're heading to live concerts, and I hope that we can soon predict accurately when that can happen. I hoped, as you know, that we could have live concerts in the spring. We spent a lot of time, as most people in business or academia or performance have done over the last 10 or 11 months, trying to anticipate when things would get better or change. But we have virtual concerts lined up starting in May. There are 2 in May and 2 in June. And keep in touch. We'll let you know when we can announce next year. Probably the very end of 2021 would be my optimistic solution there. And as far as where we're headed, we certainly need to address the political questions of diversity, as Susan Hallauer is going to do in her lecture coming up in April. We need to represent America more broadly in our audience, in our board, in our administration, and in our programming and personnel. That's a big order, but we'll do that. I wanted to mention too, this spring, we not quite definite, but probably the beginning of June, we'll have a virtual gala. This was a program for the 42nd anniversary gala. This would be 46th coming up. But this will be, I hope, our only virtual gala, but it'll be festive and fun. So we'll get in touch with you about that. I think I'm running out of time, Henry, but I can make the answer to this last question very short.
I think we have time. I think we can all stick around for a few minutes longer. This last question is a little more personal. Louise, you've been an inspiration to so many of us. Many of us here, the 60-something people who are attending, I believe, are your fans. What words of advice would you give to younger artists like myself who are looking to follow your footsteps?
Oh, thank you, Henry. If you have an opportunity to find a space like Corpus Christi, that would be ideal. A lot of young groups start out with the corner of their apartment, like I'm doing today. Haven't had to use my desk in my bedroom for music before 1800 before, but then find knowledgeable, like-minded, and I would say contemporary, talented colleagues, and then get good colleagues who can give you business and administrative advice about running conservatively. I would suggest a concert series, and then go for it. Whether you're performing and presenting, most groups do a combination, most series do a combination of the two, but go for your dream and have fun and work hard. So thank you.
Thank you, Louise. So I'm going to try to do this. So what I'm going to do is unmute everybody for just a few seconds, if possible, and then we'll clap for Louise. All right, ready? Let's go.
Bravo!
Yeah.
We love you, Louise. Look at that. Oh, music before 1800 rocks.
That's wonderful. So I believe we have a few questions. So let me just pull these questions up. So I believe this question came from Vincent. Louise, you may need to unmute yourself again. He said, how about more organ recitals?
The problem that I have is my commitment to using historical instruments, and Corpus Christi's organ doesn't fit those restrictions. We've talked not seriously enough, I think, about using one of the new organs in New York City that are Baroque organs. There are a lot more now than there were even 10 years ago. So it's a good question and a nice reminder we need to address that. That's the next question is.
Yeah.
It's a good one.
So
then I answer. That's our biggest challenge, don't you think, Henry?
Yeah. I'm not sure if there really is an answer to that. If there really is an answer, that person needs to get $1 million. So, let's go on. I believe there are two questions here. The first one has to do with identifying women composers.
Yeah, not a specific effort. I think Byron Shankman played a couple of harpsichord pieces by women composers in his Italian harpsichord repertoire last spring. And Kenny Weiss, when he did a concert a couple of years ago, Kenny's a harpsichordist, with Lina Tour-Bonnet, the Spanish violinist, did Elizabeth Jacquet de la Guerre. Yes, I'll keep the list, generating a longer list than we have at the moment, and make that more at the top of the list of the efforts moving forward. Acoustical Imperfections of Corpus Christi, I'd almost defer to Margaret Panofsky, but I don't want to put her on the spot. I think the biggest problem is when we have a large group and they're spread out across the front of the sanctuary, it's hard for the performers to hear themselves one end to the other. And with the appearance of the historical performance program at Juilliard, which began at 2009, we've had larger and larger ensembles. Excuse me, and that sort of tests the limit of the space, but also tests the acoustics. I have this notion that a certain size is really optimum there. You can hear Paul Odette as a solo lutenist very well, although he's better served at the Kosciuszko Foundation because it's a more appropriate, intimate space. You can hear viola da gambas throughout the church. But the size of the ensemble is a big consideration there. Let me drink some water while you look at another question.
Yeah, I think, in fact, I believe that is the last question. And since maybe you're running out of steam already, I just want to remind everybody to visit our website at MB1800.org. Help us donate some money, and we hope to see you at the next lecture, which is on March 7th. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Louise.
Okay.